Welcome to the Final Ghost podcast. I'm Anna Bogutska, co-founder of the Final Ghost Collective and your podcast host. There's so much good new horror out right now, and I've got a few exciting interviews with the filmmakers who made them. Alongside the release of Master in the UK on Amazon Prime, I spoke with the film's writer-director Mariama Diallo, whose previous work in horror includes this amazing short film called Hairwolf, which you can watch online too, and which I actually screened way back in the day in one of the Final Girls early touring programs called We Are the Weirdos. So it's been amazing to see what Mariama did after that short. In my chat with her, which is entirely spoiler-free, we talk about her love for horror, the inspirations behind setting her feature film in the dark world of academia, and of course working with the great Regina Hall. Master draws from the aesthetics of dark academia and campus set teen horrors, but really focuses on the lives of three women who are trying to find their place in an elite university while suspecting that there might be something sinister lurking. If you enjoy this conversation and this podcast, do follow us at The Final Ghost UK on Instagram and Twitter, and consider leaving us a little review on Apple Podcasts. With all of that said, please enjoy my conversation with Master's writer-director Mariama Diallo. Hi Mariama, how are you doing?
I'm very good. Hi Anna.
I actually screened your film around the UK a few years ago.
I know The Final Girl. I was like, this is so familiar. Oh my god, Farewell.
Yeah. So it's so lovely to finally speak to you, and congratulations on Master. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for noticing Hairwolf back in the day, and having me on for this.
No, and I'm really excited to dig into some of the choices and the themes of Master. But I guess because the first time we get to speak, I'm always really curious about people's relationships to horror. So I wanted to ask you, what is your own personal attachment or attraction to the genre?
So I have loved horror since I was a kid. I'm the kind of person who loves to freak myself out. I love to scare myself. And it wasn't even necessarily confined, to film. I also loved reading, horror novels. There's that book series, Scary Stories to Give You Nightmares, I think it was called. I would, read these horror folk tales and give myself nightmares, truly. And just so many films that scared the pants off of me. And what I love about horror, I think, is the immediacy, that it's a very visceral experience, and it's very, it's physical and it's emotional, and it really, it's a transformative experience. And I love the kind of space that it allows you to enter that isn't even necessarily governed by logic. It's really, I think in terms of film, like it's a very artful space because you're able to move past the, the rules and boundaries of our real lives.
I agree with you on so many levels with your approach to horror, and kind of talking about the spaces and the threat of certain spaces and some of the kind of recurring imagery of horror. One of the things that really felt quite interesting to me about Master was this use of the academic setting as a space of horror and of threat. And it's been quite interesting to see a certain resurgence in what people are calling dark academia as an almost aspirational aesthetic. And this kind of looks at a different side of it. So I'm wondering kind of what attracted you about the academic setting as a space for the horrific?
I think that my connection to it was, personal, and it really, the film grew out of some of my own personal experiences. And then even beyond that, I think, for instance, my mom is a retired academic, and certainly over my lifetime, I heard a number of things about her own experience and her challenges in that kind of space. And so as I began to think about this film and think about the character of Gail Bishop and this school of Ancaster and everything that the story was, the demands that the story was placing on the character, they all felt like they were pointing me towards a horror space. There was something very horrific about those spaces and, those institutions. And so I just kind of followed that. I followed that path.
Mm. And can you talk a little bit about the choice to also have the film be and the mystery of it as well be presented from two points of view, both from Gail's and from Jasmine's, to different generations of women who are entering the academic sphere?
Yeah, that's something that that evolved over the script writing process, and it didn't occur to me immediately. I think probably because I was, in a certain sense, following this, the dogma of screenwriting where you stay in one character's perspective. And so my first draft of the script was told entirely through Gail's point of view. So even though the events of the film happened more or less in the same way, our experience of Jasmine was just limited to the times that Gail would see Jasmine or run into her, or Jasmine would come to her office. But as I continued writing and in conversation with my producers at Animal Kingdom, I realized that it was really important to also have access to Jasmine and to her inner world and her emotional space, and that I wanted to, try to also do this dual narrative and really, get into Jasmine's head more than, just Gail's perspective would allow. And I'm so grateful that, that was a decision that was made, because I think that it opens up different parts of the film. And I think that you're able to see, from two different sides of the coin, one a student and one a professor, how this school is placing certain pressures on them, and how, some of the generational differences and how they're responding to it. And also just, the differences of their own circumstances and personalities. And I think that that's something that was, I felt like I really cracked something when I realized that I could also follow Jasmine.
And you've kind of hinted at a little bit about your process, but I'd love to hear more about how you actually build a story and how you conceptualize a film like Master, which has so many unspoken things and things in the shadows that really worked for me alongside the narratives of the characters.
Yes, thank you so much for saying that, the unspoken things and the things in the shadows. That's definitely, something that was really important for me to come across, because I think of Ancaster as this kind of space that is shadowy and, where things are lurking and there's a lot more than meets the eye. And so the process of, coming up with the story and writing the script, it was a very natural evolution, which was interesting. The title was the thing that grabbed me first. I was just so fascinated by the word master and the, how the multiplicity of definitions that you could draw from it, and the power of it and the history of it and the weight of it. And then I started thinking about Gail, and I knew I wanted to tell a story of a Black woman who's become a master in this kind of space. And, in the literal sense, we know what that means, and it's the academic title, but then there's the metaphorical sense. And I wanted to see what Gail would try to master over the course of that semester that we see her. And then it's almost like there's this gravitational pull where more and more elements of the story just started to get sucked in. And I think that, part of that was due to just everything that was on my mind and these unexpressed emotions that I had unearthed by going back into my own time as a college student and putting some of that into the film. And so that was the process of the genesis. And then, I rewrote the film. And a lot of that was in collaboration with my producers at Animal Kingdom. And they were really, really helpful partners, just, really digging into the story and looking at the characters and thinking about the world and looking at the horror and the supernatural and making sure that felt like it was earned, and not gratuitous, or just
Hmm.
there for the hell of it. So the rewriting process was really, really important to the evolution of the script, and it took a while. It was it was months of kind of trying different drafts and trying out different things before I felt like I really got the film.
How many drafts did you go through, out of curiosity?
I couldn't even count. It's hard to say because at a certain point, I would, if I made, I mean, there are dozens, honestly, but, one draft to another could just be, a few dialogue tweaks, and
Hmm.
then I would, rename the file and make a new one. Or there could be, much more significant changes that I would make to a story, and trying to, shore up a character or add in new scenes. But it was about 9 or 10 months of working on the draft. So there were many, too many to count.
Wow. And you kind of mentioned this the occult elements, and bringing in the occult elements kind of in an earned way. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what appealed to you about that, and specifically kind of about this idea of hauntings, or there's a couple of instances of a sort of a witch-like figure that appears.
Yeah, I think at the most basic level, that's my favorite kind of horror. I love
So,
ghost stories. I love apparitions. I love the supernatural, even more so, than a slasher, or a horror that is more, directly bound by the rules of our world. So I was really excited to play in that kind of space. And then, given where the school is located, which is in, Massachusetts, and it's a Salem-esque type town, I really, I thought about a lot about the witch trials, which is just such a fascinating chapter of the, American history. And, it's like, on the one hand, it's like these people went berserk. What happened to them, and it's really one of those instances of a cloistered society completely losing its mind, which I think we also see kind of reflected in the world of the film and Ancaster. But then it's also this story of deadly misogyny that killed so many innocent women. But then there's another part of that story that sometimes gets overlooked, which is the role that a woman of color also played in the witch trials, and was one of the first people to be accused, and was, I think, maybe the sole survivor of the accused. I might be wrong, but certainly one of the very, very few survivors, who's Tituba, a possibly Indigenous American woman, or a Black woman. So much of her identity isn't known, but she was certainly a slave, and survived the witch trials by confessing to being a witch. So just, this idea of what it means to be a witch, and whether it will doom you or whether it will save you, was something that was really interesting to me, and really on my mind. And I just wanted to bring it into the film.
Bringing a little bit of your previous short, which I loved, Hair Wolf, which also, you're looking at Black culture being appropriated by white people, and here there's this young college student who is almost entering this really oppressive space of whiteness as well, and that being not extremely damaging to her on so many different levels, in a way that seems invisible to a lot of people around her. And I'm wondering kind of why do you think kind of the horror genre, the horror space is so fertile to explore something that is perhaps difficult to explore in other genres of cinema?
I think that horror is really transgressive generally, and I think that horror is a space in which filmmakers are allowed to break with the conventions of our normal world, whether that's in terms of what we look at, and what we depict, or or what we discuss in the case of Hair Wolf, or Master. So I think that people go into horror films with open minds and with a certain readiness to enter into an emotional experience that maybe doesn't happen as much all the time in some of the other genre spaces. So I think people are just very, very open, which is great. And then, for the stories, I think it makes sense because I always think, and it's probably the words of a professor lurking somewhere in my mind, that horror when it's really, really working on all levels is so often about anxieties, and rendering a personal anxiety, on a societal level. Like I look at Carrie, and I think that there's a way that you can view Carrie as a film that discusses fear of the female body and of a pubescent woman and what does that mean, and menstruation and all of that entails, and the connection between womanhood and witchcraft. Speaking of witchcraft, and how so often in history there's also been this fear of women in that way as well. So I think that for a long time horror filmmakers have been using the genre to talk about more than, just the narrative of the story. They're also talking about something deeper, which is what makes it so compelling. So I feel glad, when I make a film and I'm talking about my anxieties and my feelings of unease and rendering it through horror, I feel so glad that there's the space for that. And I think that it's something that was already established, going way back to a lot of those classic horror films.
I really agree with you. And I really loved how you phrased that emotional space that you can react to horror films, not necessarily intellectually,
Right.
but, which is a different level, but kind of feel it in your gut, even if you're not being directly told kind of what the intention or the narrative is. And on a kind of slightly different tangent, I wanted to ask you about again, going back to Gail and to Jasmine, kind of about how do you work with your performers in terms of, are you very extremely specific in your direction, or are you interested in allowing them a space to play and to bring in their own experiences to the roles?
Yeah, I think that, I felt so close. Having written the script, I felt so close to the characters and really like I knew them. But the process of, working with Zoe or Amber Gray or Gina Hall and all of our cast was, also opening it up to them, which was important, and I think that the characters grew in really significant ways after our conversations. And so, before we got on set, we were fortunate to have a really decent amount of time set aside for rehearsals. And much of the rehearsal time we would spend discussing the characters, discussing the script, really doing a lot of analysis of motivations and backstory and origins, because it felt really meaningful for them to be fleshed out and for them to really feel like three-dimensional characters to the performers as well. And, each of them, Zoe, Regina, Amber, brought their interpretations and their views to the characters also. And it was, it would be truly in discussion, and, they might ask me a question, and, I would answer if I felt like I had the answer, but I would also ask them questions, which was fun. Even being the writer, I would really try to treat them like they were just these real people outside of me. So, in a given scene, I might ask, well, so why do you think she said this, and we would think about it, and we think about where we imagined the character had just come from in, wherever they were preceding that scene. What are they about to do? And that was really important work that we did, particularly before getting on set, that I'm glad that we had the chance to do.
And I, just to wrap up our conversation, I wanted to ask you, kind of without being too prescriptive, I always love to ask filmmakers this, kind of, what do you hope people take away from Master when they watch it?
This is always such a hard question for me, because I think that I almost I almost remove myself from the expectation there, and I kind of leave it open, and to the viewer to enter and decide and to move through that world and take with it what they will. But what I do hope is that they're able to, to empathize with the characters, even some of the characters who might not necessarily seem particularly likable. I think that it's always important just to understand, and I hope that, these characters feel, three-dimensional, that you can enter into their headspace and really try to see the world through their eyes, or try to understand why they, make the actions and the choices that they do.
Mariama, thank you so much for your time and for talking a little bit about the making of Master. I really appreciated the film and this conversation.
Thank you so much. I could have done this for hours more. Thank you so much for the great conversation, and just, being a woman in the horror space. And it's always really fun.
And thank you. I look forward to seeing what else you do in the future.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Anna.